You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
I met Peter when I was in Las Vegas, and I was working on a community project, and so was he. And he would come in from New York, where he lives, once a month, and he would do these storytelling workshops, and then he would kind of drift into some bar or some kind of club, and he would tell stories on his own. And I have to be honest, he was doing it about 8 to 10 people at a time. And I was thinking, man, he's flying all the way from New York to talk to 10 people, and I thought, this didn't quite add up to me, I'll be honest. I remember talking about it. I remember all he said to me was, just trust me. It's how I'm going to build a community. We can't do it fast. And by the time, I came back, I was there 14 months, we would have a group not only of about 30, 40, 50 community people that would show up to listen to each other's stories. But the people that came across the stage they were insurance agents, and they were architects, and they were college students. And they would stand up and they would share things that, man, were just amazing. These kind of we all got them, these kind of magical moments in our life. And so he's proven me wrong multiple times. If any of you guys, how many of you guys know what the moth is in here? I know it's not by students, man, and you guys probably aren't NPR listeners. When you get old, man, there'll be something you'll be doing. That's when you know you crossed the line and gotten old, man. But those that do, you're either a huge moth fan or you don't know what it is. NPR has a moth hour. Peter was here. How long ago was it, Peter, when you were? It
was a year ago, and I think February.
Yeah, he came here with the moth, and they packed the entire Engler, 700 people. He's the Moth Grand Slam champ, which I guess if you don't know what it is a big deal. He's the host of the Moth, and this is what he does, man. He's a storyteller. So if you guys could give a big hand for Peter.
Thanks very much. There's so much of me. All right, good. All right. When I was 13 years old, Nellie's Pond froze for the first time since my mom was a little girl. I grew up in a small town called Delanco, New Jersey. It was about 2,000 people. We had no traffic lights until I got to be about 11. There was a place called Vinny's Pizza. They had a big sign that said "Best Pizza in Town." It was the only pizza in town. So, that's just the way it went. Now, on this Saturday afternoon, when I'm 13, I just want to get out of my house and I want to go down to Nellie's Pond. I want to ride my bike on the ice because I'd never done that before. That's what I wanted to do. But it was also just to get out of the house. When I was growing up, it was chaos. So I'm walking through my living room, and there's my dad laying on the floor. He's chain smoking Marlboro Reds, and he's watching college football. And my mom, that sounds a little better. My mom is crimping my sister's hair because it's 1991, and that's what she did. And she's of the opinion that my sister's hair is, quote, a rat's nest. My sister's response is, quote, I hate you. So, I just want to get out of the house. Every Saturday night when I was growing up, there was a Saturday night fight. We'd sit around the kitchen table at dinner. Somebody would say something to somebody, which reminds somebody of something else. That would make somebody else explode. 2 people would cry, and I'd have to do the dishes. That happened every Saturday night. So Saturday afternoon was always kind of the undercard of that event, and I just wanted to get out of there as best I could. So I get away from my family. I get on my bike. I ride the 10 minutes over to Nellie's Pond, and I push my bike through the little sliver of woods to the pond. Now, the pond's about the size of 2 football fields, and in the middle there are a bunch of kids playing ice hockey. They swept off a bunch of the snow, and they're playing there. There's a street hockey league in town, but when I was a kid, I didn't play street hockey because there's all this equipment. It's very expensive. But I just wanted to ride my bike. So these kids are playing around there, and I'm riding around and listening to the crunch of my tires on that thin crust of snow that forms just above the ice on these fat bicycle tires, just making that really beautiful crunching sound. And I go around the perimeter of the game, and I get over to the side, and I'm I'm looking up at the sky through the denuded branches of the trees, and it looks like wooden stained glass. It's beautiful. Then all of a sudden, my hat's ripped off my head, and it's up in the tree in front of me, and I hear laughter. It's my favorite hat. It's a green and gray knit Philadelphia Eagles hat with a pom-pom on top. It's very warm. It's my favorite hat in the world, and now it's in the tree. So I turn around, and there's Eric. Eric is one of those kids with a big pumpkin head, and his hair is too blonde. You know those kids, his hair is just too blonde? That's Eric. He's a perfect henchman. And I turn around, and there's his boss, Mike Dawes, right in front of me. He's got his knees clamped on my front tire, and he's got his hands holding my hands on my handlebars, and he's screaming in my face, "Come on, what are you going to do? Nice hat. I'll kick your ass." He's screaming at me. He's got a flat top haircut and these squinty little eyes and braces. He looks like a pig fucked a lawnmower. He's just screaming in my face. "Come on, what are you going to do?" He's trying to goad me into a fight. The hockey game stops, and the kids are looking over. The 3 or 4 dads in the corner are drinking coffee, and they're looking at me too. And now I'm just here in the middle of it. He's trying to get me to fight him. I don't want to fight. I don't like the feeling of a fight. It's poison inside of your body. It's all that adrenaline. All it does is just nobody wins a fight. Doesn't matter if you think you will. Nobody wins anyway. I just wanted to avoid it anyway. All I wanted to do that day was to get out of my house. So here I am stuck in the middle of this thing, and I just take it. He's in my face, and he's just screaming. At this point, at 13, I'm almost as big as I am now, but Mike's about 2 years older than me, and he's bigger than me anyway. I might be 6 feet tall, but I feel like I'm 3, and that's just the way it is. So he's going, and he keeps going, trying to get me to fight him until eventually he either gets what he wants or he doesn't get what he wants, and he eventually just kind of laughs and walks away and kicks my tire one more time. The hockey game starts again. The 3 or 4 dads start drinking their coffee again, except for one of them's looking over at me, and I can see him looking at me just thinking, I'm glad that's not my kid. I leave my hat for dead because I can't get it, so I take my bike and I push it through that little sliver of woods, and I head back home. I put my bike in the garage, and I walk past my family, and I go upstairs in my room, and I turn off the lights, and I put my pillow over my face because I don't want to talk to anybody. After a couple minutes, I hear my dad coming up the steps, and I feel his big body sit on the foot of the bed. And he says, "What's the matter, pal?" In front of the pillow. I say, "Nothing." And he lifts up the pillow. "What's the matter, pal?" And I put it back. "Nothing." He takes the pillow, he throws it across the room. "What's the matter?" I say, "Mike Dawes." He says, "Oh, that kid's a prick." I was like, "I know." And I tell him everything that happened. He says, he nods his head. He says, "Okay, come with me." So I follow my dad downstairs where the phone is. We had a rotary phone. Remember those? And he gets the phone book. It's real thin. It's a small town. And he looks up D for Dawes. There's only one of them. He gets that phone. He dials the first 6 numbers. He looks at me. He dials the 7th number. He hands me the phone. He says, "You're going to tell him you're going to fight him tomorrow at 3 o'clock. And he lets go of the number. So now it's ringing in my ear. And I want to run away. But my dad's 8 feet tall and 800 pounds. He's the biggest man in the world. And I'm a little boy. Even though I'm not a little boy, I can't get around him. So he's right there, and he's looking at me. So the phone's ringing. This woman answers. I say, "Hi, can I talk to Mike?" She says, "Who's this?" I said, "Tell him it's Pete." She says, "Okay." I hear her walk away. I hear Mike come to the phone. He says, "Okay, punk, what do you want?" I say, "Hi, Mike. I want to fight you tomorrow at 3 o'clock at Nellie's Pond." He says, "Okay, I'll kick your ass tomorrow." I say, "Thanks, Mike," and I hang up the phone. My dad nods his head, and he goes, "Okay, come with me." So I follow him out past my mom and my sister, and we go out to the garage, and that's where my dad starts to show me how to fight. He says, "Okay, you're right-handed, so you're going to stand like this. You're going to lead with your left. This is your jab. It's going to give you distance. Then this is your strength punch." He's holding up his hands. He's showing me how to make a fist. He's showing me how to use the weight of my body. He's showing me all this stuff, how to fight. Now, when I was growing up, my dad never hit me. Never, not once. Never, not one time did my dad ever hit me. That's a low bar for a parent to have to get over, but he did. He did it. But all the games that we played when I was growing up were thumb wrestling and arm wrestling and leg wrestling and wrestling. And they would always end up with me in a submissive position underneath him, with him saying, "We got to toughen you up, son. We got to toughen you up." My dad didn't understand the kind of kid that he had. The kind of son that he had was the kind of kid that liked to make stuff out of construction paper and go down the river and throw stones and read books and put on music in his room and dance around. I liked to take baths because I thought showers were too violent, right? So my dad didn't understand that kind of kid, but I could see that by him showing me how to fight, what he was doing was trying to turn me into the kind of son that he could understand. And I just wanted to please him, so I went along with it. So after we're sweating, steam is coming off of us in this cold garage. And after like an hour of that, he starts to show me what he learned when he was growing up on the streets in Philadelphia. It's one move: grab, clench, and twist. That's it. Really simple. So after that's all done, the steam's rising off of us, he pats me on the back. He says, "Okay, son, you're going to do fine." And I guess I agree with him. We go in the house, my mom makes dinner, and we go up to the kitchen table. During the dinner, my sister says something, reminds my mom of something, makes my dad explode. My dad leaves the table, my sister and my mom start crying. I got to do the dishes. Pretty good Saturday night fight. Afterwards, I go upstairs, and I'm trying to go to sleep, but I'm having a hard time calming down because the next day I have a scheduled fight like I'm George Foreman. It's not something I'm used to, but I eventually get to sleep, and when I do wake up, it's time to go to church. So we go to church, we sit through Mass, and at the end, I go to light a candle. Not one of those little quarter candles, but the dollar candle, because I need some extra help. And I put that dollar in there, and I go over and I kneel down, and I say an Our Father and a Hail Mary, and then just like a remix from me to Jesus. I'm like, "Come on, buddy, you got to help me out here. I don't know what's happening. Don't let anybody get hit. In your name, amen," And we go home, and my mom makes pancakes, and they're delicious. So then after breakfast, it's time, it gets to be about 2:30, so it's time for me to start getting ready for my fight. I go down and I get my smaller winter jacket, so I have more range of motion. I get my second favorite hat, it's red. I go to the garage and I get my bike and I ride past the couple minutes to get to Nellie's Pond. I would leave my family in the living room. My mom's combing my sister's hair out. She says it's a rat's nest. My sister says, "I hate you." My dad's watching NFL football. I leave them behind. I go over to the pond. I get over there, and it's close to 3 o'clock. It's about 2:55. I go through that little sliver of woods, and I push my way into the middle of the pond. There's a league street hockey game that day, so I have the pond all to myself, and I go directly to the center. And I'm just standing there in the middle of this pond. Never felt more alone in my whole life. It gets to be 3 o'clock. At 3:05, there's a rustle in the bushes across the way, and I get ready. It must be a dog or a squirrel or something. I don't know what it is. 3:10, I put my bike down. I start bouncing on the balls of my feet to stay warm. 3:15, I'm throwing punches. I'm just trying to stay loose and stay warm. 3:20, 3:25. At 3:27, I get a branch from a deadfall, and I start throwing it up in my hat. On the fourth try, it knocks my hat off, and I catch it in my hand. I take the red one, I put it in my pocket, and put my Eagles hat back on. 3:30, 3:35. At 3:39, I take my bike, and I push it through the little sliver of woods, and I take the long way home so I can let that unspent adrenaline, that poison, that pain just kind of seep its way out of my body. And I get home, and I put my bike in the garage, and I walk past my family, and I go upstairs, and I put my pillow over my face, and I turn my lights off because I don't want to talk to anybody. 2 years later, I'm walking down the hallway at Holy Cross High School. I'm a freshman. It's during class. I have bathroom pass. And I'm walking down this empty hallway. And there's a junior named Mike Dawes walking the other way. And he sees me. And he stops. And he turns around and he walks the other way. And he never bothered me again. Years later, 8 years later, I'm sitting in a bar called the Jug Handle Inn with my dad. I just turned 21. And we're drinking beer and eating chicken wings. Because when you turn 21, you're supposed to drink beer and eat chicken wings with your father. That's what you're supposed to do. And I'm telling him about college, and he's telling me about his life, and we're just going back and forth. And he says, "You know what I saw the other day?" I said, "I don't know." He says, "You'll never guess." I'm like, "Tell me." And he says, "I saw Mike Dawes." I go, "Oh, yeah, that kid's a prick." He says, "Yeah." He says, "Do you remember when you were a kid, you went to go fight him at Nellie's Pond?" I said, "Yeah, I do remember that." He said, "You know, after you left the house, I left and I went around the long way and I hid in the bushes. And I watched you standing out there in the middle of the ice all by yourself. And I knew you were scared. And I knew you were all alone. But I watched you be there. I watched you stand there. And I watched you stand there with your strength and your bravery. And I was never more proud of you than I was in that moment." Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, guys. That story is actually part of the show I'm going to be doing at the Englert tomorrow night. It's that show is called Daddy Issues. It's about growing up with and without my dad. It's a complicated relationship, you know. it's kind of interesting telling that story out of context with the rest of the show. It has a different meaning. Is anybody coming to the show tomorrow night? Does anybody have tickets? Okay, so spoiler alert, you already heard some of it. But you know, hearing it within the context of the show, the whole story takes a different meaning. Dave, I want to thank Dave for bringing me here. He's amazing. I had a great time meeting him, and I'm glad that our friendship can continue outside of the horrific oven of Las Vegas. That place is terrible. You know, you already heard a little bit of my biography. I grew up in a small town in New Jersey, outside of Philadelphia. It was a real small town. You know, I grew up in a family that wasn't really great. You know, my parents fought a lot all the time. That's what they did. They separated and got back together a lot, and it was just chaos. You know, when I was growing up, my sister, to add to that, my sister had epilepsy when she was a little girl, and that added to the chaos of everything that we were going through. It was tough, and my response to that when I was a little kid. You know, I always felt like I didn't have a voice at all. My biggest fear, and I have to believe that this is the biggest fear that all of us have, is that we're going to be misunderstood or we're going to not be heard, that no one's going to care what we have to say. So a lot of times what we do is we just shut up. Or we overcompensate and we get all crazy and we yell, you know. But it all comes from a place of fear, and that place of fear is that what we have to say doesn't matter. And that's how I felt growing up. And so the two ways that I dealt with that was to either just shut down and stay alone. I spent a lot of my time alone when I was a kid. Or I would do what my mother called attention-seeking behavior. And I went to Catholic school, and I would get a little crazy, and the nuns would have a field day with me. You know, so that was my biggest fear growing up. It was just not having a voice, And honestly, I didn't. Because I didn't give myself one, you know. No one had that control over me. I let the external forces in my life kind of make me feel like I didn't have anything to say, you know. And what I did say, I felt wasn't important. I got older, went through high school. My parents got divorced when I was 15. That was awesome. That was great. You know, I went to college. I went to Rutgers University. When I got there, I started doing sketch comedy and plays and working with a theater group in a room not very dissimilar to this. We didn't have a theater. We had a lecture hall that had a little stage on it, and we would do our plays in there. It was a bunch of 18-year-old kids trying to do Glengarry Glen Ross. It was pretty terrible, but I had a great time, and I met a lot of great people. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that I was good at. It felt so good to be on stage making a connection with somebody. It felt so good to do some sketch comedy, right? To get up and somebody would laugh and think that maybe that person was having a terrible day. And for 15 seconds, you made them laugh. And then that got rid of all the crap that they went throughout the day. You know, trying to play serious characters as a kid, you get up and like somebody would watch and they would just lose themselves. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with performing. I fell in love with all the other stuff that went with it. And because of all the other stuff that went with it, things got kind of crazy, and I ended up dropping out of college. You know, I went to Rutgers University for 5.5 years. You needed 120 credits to graduate. I got 66, which is almost more impressive, I think. By the end of it, there was, you know, I also, you know, in my life, you know, you could probably guess. I've always had part of my personality has been anxiety and depression, and I've had to battle that my whole life. When I was 23 years old, it got a hold of me really bad, and by the time I was 23, it had really sharp teeth, and I couldn't shake it. And you know, eventually, I was able to ask for help, and eventually, I got out of it. And you know, I met a really good woman in college. We're still together today. We've been together 18 years, and she saved my life. But I did too, because I started making better choices, you know. When Sarah, my wife, and I got married, we eventually moved to New York City because Sarah had started to develop seizures and had epilepsy. It was something I was used to, you know, so we were able to take care of each other. When she was growing up, her mother had anxiety and depression, so it was something she was used to, so we were there to kind of help each other out and help support each other. It was very serendipitous to be able to find each other and find two people that could take care of each other. But we eventually moved to New York because she couldn't drive, and because by that time I was doing improv comedy with a group called Chicago City Limits in New York. I was in their national touring company, and I was traveling around a lot. When we were still living in New Jersey, when I would get out of town, since Sarah couldn't drive, she was stuck. So we ended up moving to New York because there, there's a subway, and because there's a subway, it runs 24 hours. She's just as mobile as anybody else. The downside is New York is full of people and smells like urine. That's the downside. But there's always something to do. And here's one of the things that was something to do. I was doing the comedy. I tried doing some stand-up. I enjoyed that. I was doing stage acting and on-camera acting and stuff. And then one day I went to go see a buddy's band. He was playing in a space in the village called the Bitter End. And I went down to go see his band, and I was late. So I missed his set. But as I was waiting for him to come out, I saw a thing on the calendar for an event the next week that said The Moth Storytelling. And it was a name I'd heard because people were telling me over the years, you got to go check this thing out. You got to go check this thing out. You're always telling stories. You got to go check this thing out. So I went home that day, and I looked on their rudimentary website. This was 8-9 years ago. And I listened to some of the stories. I was like, I can do this. So I went back the next week, and they do it like a raffle, like a lottery. You put your name in, and they draw 10 names. And I got picked, and I told a story, and it was terrible. It was so bad. It was so bad. And afterwards, the producer came up to me and said this. She said, that was terrible. But you got to come back. You got to come back and do this. So I fell in love with it. I like doing the improv and the comedy. I like doing the acting, but those were playing characters. There was an artifice that was in between me and the people that were listening. The thing that I really started to fall in love with when I started telling stories was that artifice, that wall was gone. It was the quickest connection that I could make with other people. And as somebody who grew up scared and somebody who grew up really isolated and feeling like they were alone, this way to make a connection with people was something so important to me, But it was better than that. What ended up happening is I started telling stories about these difficult things in my life. I started out telling the stories of the crazy stuff that happened. I drove a ice cream truck, and I got into a fight with another guy, and he beat me with a hammer. I told that story. How I met my wife and how I flirted with her first night. I told that story. All these crazy stories of the crazy things that happened. And then once I ran out of those, I had to start telling the stories of the little moments. Going to get into a fight at a pond, a little moment, right? One day. And all of our experiences, this is all of us, all of our experiences and our memories are inside of us. Everything we've ever done, every choice we've ever made, every person we met, every emotion we've ever felt, they're all inside of us. They don't go anywhere. But as time goes on, what you end up doing is you take those memories and you shove them behind old furniture and stuff in your brain because you don't want to look at them, because they hurt. Life hurts, man. It just does. Life is beautiful too, but it also is it's full of pain. But that's part of what makes you who you are. But if you let those experiences just kind of fester, they grow and they become scary. Think of a little kid inside of his room in the middle of the night thinking there's a monster. When he turns the light on, he sees that it's just a pile of clothes on a chair. But in the dark, it's a monster. So when you start to tell stories about your life, when you start to look honestly at these difficult moments in your life where you were scared or you were vulnerable or you didn't know what you were doing, then you start to shine a light on those things. And you start to own them instead of them owning you. You start to gain agency over your own life. Nothing can beat you then, man. I'm still scared. I'm scared all the time. It's the fear is something that is always part of me, but I don't let it stop me. It's scary to go back and relive difficult times. It's really scary. It's scary to go back and tell stories about the mistakes you've made. It's really scary. But when you're doing it, what happens is, when you're telling the truth, which is different from fact is something that is almost impossible to find. Truth is, what do you remember? How did it make you feel? If you can go back and truthfully talk about the difficult, vulnerable moments of your life, then what happens is the people that you're telling them to start to nod their head. Because our stories aren't about the things that happened to us. Our stories are about how we felt when they did. Stories are really about fear. They're about joy. They're about anger. They're about trust. We all know what fear is. We all know what joy is, what anger is. Those are what our stories are really about. It's not about the things that happened to us, it's about how we felt about them. So, when you tell your stories and somebody nods their head, that means that something you said made them feel like they weren't alone anymore. And I see you nod your head, and that makes me realize that I'm not the only person that went through this either. And it takes the individual specific experience and it makes it universal. Everybody tells stories all the time. We all do it. It's an instinctual thing that we all do. You know, it's the barriers that are in the way of people being free enough to tell their own stories are you know, well, I don't have anything interesting to say. No one's gonna be interested in what I have to say. It's a waste of time. That's your own self getting in your own way. It's not about being interesting. It's about being honest. If a songwriter writes a song and plays it, it's not up to that songwriter to tell people how to feel about that song. Wow. All right. There we go. Okay. If a painter puts together a painting and hangs it on the wall, it's not up to that painter to tell people how to feel. It's up to the people listening to it or watching it to figure out what it means to them in their life. It's the same thing with stories. The thing about the painting and the song and the story you write and the whatever it is that you make, the vase that you sculpt, the statue you put together, whatever it is that you make, the sweater you knit, it doesn't matter, whatever it is, it's a story you're telling, some way, right? It doesn't matter that you think it's uninteresting. Don't worry about that. It's up to somebody else to look at it and have it resonate with them. You can't tell people what to feel, ever. And once you realize that and you let that responsibility off of your shoulders, it frees you up, and then nothing can stop you. Like I said, I was ruled by fear for most of my life. But as time got on, I realized that that's okay. And I'm still scared a lot, you know. One of the things Dave asked me to think about was if my college-age self was in this room, what would I say to him? First of all, he wouldn't be here. He would be back in his room with a crazy glass contraption and a lighter. That's where he would be. But I would chase him down after class, and I would knock on his door, and I would tell him it's okay to be afraid. I would tell him it's okay to make mistakes. I would tell him that don't freeze up. Because you freeze up because you're afraid you're going to fail. You freeze up because you're afraid you're not going to be perfect. You know, it's not about that. It's about always searching for the perfection, but knowing that you're never going to find it. Never, ever, ever. You're never going to find perfection. And once you realize, idiot, this is me talking to myself, that perfection isn't the goal, then you can do whatever you want. And it's okay. I made a lot of dodgy choices in my life, you know, and I wouldn't change any of it. I found myself in a lot of dark holes, and I wouldn't change any of it because all of it made me who I am, and all of it made my life richer for it. And because my life is that rich, and because I'm able to, what I do now, generally, 99% of the work I do is autobiographical. So I end up going back and wading through the swamp of my life. And some of it is terrifying. But in the end, it becomes clear. And I can, somewhere along the line over the years, I've found the voice. And when I give voice to the stories, that little kid that was 8 years old, that little kid that was 10 years old, that kid that was 13 and standing in the middle of a pond all by himself, that kid has a voice now too. And that's become my goal, is to give that kid a voice. Because, he didn't have it then, but he's going to have it now. I'm going to make sure of that. Our stories are so important. Our stories are the thing that add to the truth and the beauty of the world. you know, and not just our successes. If you try something and you succeed at it, like if I went out to tell a story the first time at the Moth and I did a great job and I won the competition, I probably wouldn't have done it again. Because if you try something and you succeed, all that means is you already knew how to do it. But if you try something and you fail, that means you got to figure out how to do it. And when you figure out how to do it, you become bigger than you were before. And that's how you grow. And now, I'm bigger than I ever was. Because I've failed, and I tried harder after that. And I'm going to keep doing that. It's going to keep getting harder. And that's okay, you know? It's okay. Because I have the voice to talk about it now. And I have the support system around me. And most importantly, I have myself and the strength that I have through telling my stories. And there's nothing that can stop me anymore. Because I don't want to stop me, so nothing's going to stop me, you know? So, yeah. Thanks, guys.
Why don't you repeat the questions too, man, just so we can get them.
All right, he was asking about, Glengarry Glen Ross, and if I could give a piece of that. To be honest, my role in that was, it was a guy, an ancillary character named Balin, who was the police chief, right? So so what I did is I gave him a whole backstory. I gave him the first name Chet, because I thought his name was Chet, and I called him Chet Balin. And I thought of the play as, this is a play about a police detective that shows up at a sales conference, a sales office, and there's all kinds of mess around that. So really, I didn't have a lot of lines. Mamet didn't give Chet a lot to say. Are we done? Thanks. All right, so the question is, when you mess up, when you make a mistake in the moment, particularly in a story, if you use the wrong terminology, where do you go from there? I don't know if you guys don't even know. When I was just telling that story in the beginning, there's a whole 2-minute section before when I get to the lake, when I get to the pond, describing this whole really deep kind of visceral description of how it feels and what I see that I completely skipped over. And it wasn't until I got on my bike and rode away, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that bit. That's my most favorite bit in the story. You just keep going. It's funny, when I'm on stage, and one of the reasons, and here's another thing I wanted to tell you guys. One of the reasons I got on stage is that I got to pretend to be a version of myself that wasn't scared, right? So that's a lot. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I know that's something when people become performers, that's a lot of times what they're doing. They get to be a bigger version of themselves. So while I'm that version of myself that isn't scared, my brain's doing 10 different things. So I'm telling the story, I'm remembering the imagery of the story, I'm thinking about what's coming next, and then I'm also thinking of the things I'm missing, and then I'm also looking at this nice lady who's nodding a lot, and this kid who was sleeping for a little while, and like all this stuff that's happening. It's okay, it's early. 12:30 is early in college. But you think about all these, there's all this stuff that's happening, and in the moment, I know it's not the end of the world, because I'm going to tell the story tomorrow, and if I screw it up tomorrow, sorry to the people that have bought tickets already, if I'm going to tell it again. Each moment of telling it doesn't have the pressure of it being the only time I will, because I know that I've created a life that I'll have many chances to do it. So if you make a mistake, you just make a mistake and move on. Like that was in the inner voice in my head was saying, oh man, that part was so nice. But next time, it's okay, So I just try to let it slough off. Yes.
Are you part of a group of storytellers? You hear about storytelling, and the art of storytelling is becoming, let's just say, not as commonplace. In some cultures, that's how the historical context of that culture or many cultures is passed along. How did you, I guess, connection to storytelling, In terms of, do you see up and coming folks into storytelling, or is it a lost art?
Well, the storytelling is an instinctual thing. It's something that we all do, and you're absolutely correct. Historically, it's how people have, passed on lessons in history, and that's the way. And the reason why is because there's something in our heads instinctually that connect with narrative, and narrative is simply, it's an arc of an individual making a change in their life. There's some sort of change, right? So people have been telling stories since the beginning of time. Cave paintings are stories, right? When you look at the old historic, look at Beowulf, and look at all these the Odyssey, and like all these stories that are about people on a journey, and people passing on their family history through stories, telling a story about their grandmother or telling a story about themselves. People have been doing it forever. However, I really think that we believe today that we're so connected because of these stupid things and the laptops that we have. And we think like, oh, we're so connected. This is the internet. I can text anybody right now. You're not connected to the other people. You're connected to this stupid thing. How many times do you see people just walking around like this? No, because they're talking to a friend. They're not standing and talking to the person next to them. What happens when people are telling stories is they're making an immediate connection with the people around them. And I think that people are hungry for that and they thirst for it. So, about 17 years ago in New York City, there was a guy named George Dawes Green. He was an author that grew up in Georgia. He was born in Montana. He grew up in Georgia. And he was living in New York. And he realized in New York, nobody was listening to anybody else. They were just waiting for their turn to talk. So he started having people over his apartment to tell stories like he did back home in Georgia. It got popular, so they moved it to the back of a bar, and it got popular, so they moved it to a theater, and now it got popular to the point where there are, I think, 27 cities in the U.S. that have regular Moth Story Slams. We're now in London and Dublin, Ireland, and they just launched slams in Sydney and Melbourne in Australia just last week. It's starting to become international, right? So there is a community of people doing, by this kind of storytelling, I'm talking about first-person narrative, true first-person narrative, stories about yourself and your experience. There are people that do it now, when I first started with The Moth, it was before they even had a podcast. And then when the podcast was launched, it started out slow, but then within 6 months, it was downloaded 1 million times a month. And then a couple years ago, they started a radio show, and it got picked up on NPR. And now it's on, I think, 350 stations around the country. And it went from 0 to that many. So now there are stories that people tell on that stage at the Moth that can be heard by upwards of, 20 million people, maybe? I don't know the numbers. I dropped out of college. But the thing is, but then look at that. There's what, 7 billion people in the world, and we're talking about 20 to 30 million people that hear one thing. So it's still kind of a grassroots thing in a way. People have a thirst for this. Every place the Moth goes, and the Moth is the hub of this. There's plenty of, Jonesboro, Tennessee is called the storytelling capital of the world. And they do a lot of folk tales and family history stories. That's just as valid, and it also is storytelling. There's a circuit of fringe festivals in which people get up and tell stories, and they just do it, and no one tells them not to. They just do it, and that's valid, and that's a way to tell stories. People tell stories through mime and through dance, and it's all stories. But this true first-person narrative, every time the Moth goes and does a show, it sells out. We came here to the Engler Theater last year and sold out, oversold, man. There were people standing in the aisles. It was amazing. It was a great experience. And then, every time we go somewhere, it sells out. We did a show in Central Park, and 4,000 people showed up for an outdoor show. So I think there is a community. I feel like I'm in the hub of the community in New York, of the New York storytellers. But there are storytellers in Los Angeles. There are storytellers, and we're launching one in Asheville, North Carolina next week. They have them down in New Orleans. They're in Minnesota. They're in Chicago. They're in Detroit. They're in small towns. They're right here. They're in this room. It's everybody. How many people have heard a story before from someone? Everybody raise your hand, because you all have. We're all storytellers. It's just what's happening now is people are figuring out a way to marshal it and put it out on a stage for larger consumption. Instead of just being around the table, it's to a room full of 1,000 people. So, there is a community, and it is growing. It's amazing. And the thirst of it is because people want connection. They want to be connected to another person. And I think that's the biggest thing behind it. And yes?
When you start crafting a new story, how early in the process do you say it out loud? And how does the saying it out loud transform the story?
So the question is, when I'm crafting a story, how early in the process do I say it out loud, and how does that change the story? Pretty good? Okay. I generally, it's probably the first thing I do, probably. Like, I don't write my stories down. The story I told in the beginning, I've never written that down. So I just don't want to, I don't want to be telling the story and remembering black words on a white page. I want to be remembering my bike and my hat in the pond. And writing that down, for me, and everyone has a different way of doing it, that'll make me remember the words on the page rather than the events. So if I'm thinking about a story, I will sit down maybe with a piece of paper and just, maybe just do free writing for a couple minutes, and then I crumble it up and throw it away. I never look at it again. And so it's really just about, probably what'll happen is, a lot of times the first time I tell a story is in front of an audience. Like I'll think about it, and like maybe I'll just like walk around with it for a while. But the first time I actually get up and do it will be, there might be an open mic somewhere, or it might be a show. Sometimes I just book a show. When I started doing the show Daddy Issues, I just booked the date and then just panicked until the date. And then I showed up and I talked about my dad for an hour. That's what happened. That's nuts. Now that I said that out loud, that's crazy. That's insane. But like that's one way. I think that there are people that do write their stories down and they craft them that way, and there are people that just wing it. I'm somewhere in the middle. There is preparation, but writing a story and telling a story are cousins, but they're related, but they're not the same thing. I've taken some of these stories and I've written them down in form to be a possible memoir. And if I had somebody, God bless this person, try to do a transcript of me telling a story, it would be whatever word count, right? It might be 1,000 words. And then if I wrote the story for inclusion in like a memoir, it would probably be 2,500 to 3,000 words. You use double the words in writing than you do in telling it, because in telling a story, you have inflection, you have sentence fragments, you have subtle movements with your body and your face, and little things you can do with modulations of your voice that do a lot of the heavy lifting. Where on the page, you have to spill all of it out there. So they're very different things. Like I said, they are related because they're still stories to tell. But I would recommend, if you're looking to get up and tell a story, don't write it down. Like, get up and tell it to your cat or your lamp or somebody, and then tell it to a friend, and then tell it to an audience, or just get up, sit on a park bench and speak aloud to yourself. That's all right. Well, don't do it here. In New York, that happens all the time. You might think there's storytellers everywhere in New York, but I forget sometimes that in New York there's behavior that would cause people to call the police anywhere else. But I just every story is different. I might need different preparation for different stories at different times. So, that's not a hard and fast rule. Like, I don't want you to go away from here saying, that guy never writes his stories down. Sometimes I write an outline. Sometimes I write the first line or the last line. Sometimes, like I said, I'll do like a 5-minute free writing just to see what happens. But then I never look at that again. Because I don't want to me, storytelling is remembering the events as if they're a short film playing on the inside of your skull. And I'm telling you what I'm seeing, because you can't see it. So I think that's the place where I start from, not from words on the page, because I don't want to fall in love with those precious words. I want to fall in love with the imagery and the what I remember. Does that answer?
First of all, I'm a writer of memoir on the page, so I love what you're saying. It all resonates a lot. But you talked some about the healing power story for yourself. I know you teach storytelling. Can you give just even one maybe example of how you've seen that in other people, of learning this craft?
I was teaching a workshop once at a place called the Young Women's Leadership High School up in Spanish Harlem. And there was a girl named Giselle. And she was tough as nails. Tough as nails. I mean, the toughest girl I ever, tough as anybody I ever came up against. And she was joking through everything. She wouldn't, she was trying to tell the story about walking down, just a simple story about walking down her block. And in New York, my block is in capital letters. It's where, it's one block from one block, might as well be two different towns. And she was just telling a story about her block. We wanted to kind of like give some tribute to this place where she grew up that she had since moved away from. And it was just everything was on the surface. It was all on the surface. So I just kept kind of like pushing her a little bit until eventually the story came out that it was really about how her father had passed away, and her father was like the linchpin of that block. And since he died, the color drained out of it. The people playing drums and the lady selling the shaved ice and all the stuff that was happening were all gone. And now it was like a ghost town when she was walking down the street. And it hurt her to talk about her dad, so she didn't. So I just kind of kept like kind of gently pushing her in the direction of the truth. And when she got to it, she had this breakdown where she hysterically, she was crying. Good thing is I'm a professional hugger, so I was there. I was able to hug her. I do have, I'm batting 1,000. I've been teaching workshops for about 7 years. Every workshop I've ever taught, at least one person cries. Dave can attest to that. He took my workshop in Las Vegas. I'm very proud of that. If somebody else doesn't, I do. Because crying's really good for you. It's my favorite thing to do. But at the end, this girl, when she was able to tell the story and put it within the context of, look at what was lost in this whole neighborhood. Look how this block went from being vibrant to black and white after this man died. And when this man died, the block became a metaphor for her and about how a piece of her had died too. And she was able to be honest with it. And afterward, once she had that breakthrough, she gleefully jumped in because she realized that it felt good to be able to say it. Our secrets and the things we're afraid of, when they're inside, they feel like they're the most dangerous things in the world. But once you get them out, you're just like, oh, it's just a thing. It's okay. It can't hurt me. She graduated. The next year, she came back just so she could tell that story to her school at an assembly. She came back so she could help volunteer in the workshop to help some other really tough kid who kept a wall up around her for survival, to break that wall down so she could, grow better. If you put a wall up around yourself, you can only grow to the boundary of that wall. If you break that wall down, you can be as big as you need to be. And that's what happened with this girl. And I hold on to it in my heart. It's one of the greatest moments I've ever had, been a part of, to watch this girl kind of grow bigger than the boundaries she had originally set for herself. I think it was,
Yeah.
okay.
Got a question?
Yeah, please.
Yep.
All right, the question is, when it comes to storytelling, I said nobody can stop me. What about me? Do I stop myself? I try to, all the time. I guarantee you this, if you were to keep an eye out tomorrow for a big giant dude in a Muhammad Ali t-shirt walking around town muttering to himself, listening to Wilco really loud in his head, just going on, what am I doing? That's going to be me tomorrow, because I know tomorrow night I'm going to tell the story that hurts. I try to stop myself at every turn, because I try to tell that little voice in your head, that little editor that we all have that says, that new idea you have is terrible. Why do you think anybody cares? That little voice is an asshole. And that little asshole is going to try to stop you at all turns. And it's yourself. It's you. It's you in there trying to stop yourself. So, I've tried my best to ignore that guy, At times, it's crippling, I'll have a physical revulsion to what I'm about to do. But I do it anyway. Because my responsibility is to the story. The story happened. My goal is to tell the story as honestly and truthfully as possible. And that's my responsibility. And what happens is afterwards, somebody comes up and says, thank you, I had a dad like that too. And I've never been able to tell anybody, and you were able to say it, and thank you. I can't believe somebody understands. And you don't set out for that. That's the side effect and the benefit of shutting that stupid voice up. So it really is, I mean, you nailed it. It's who can stop you? You're the only one that can stop you, right? Because it's terrifying. But it's good because it's terrifying. If it wasn't scary, it'd be easy. It doesn't matter. If something's easy, what's it matter? It's the hard stuff that matters. Like watching somebody, watching a little kid eat a bowl of ice cream, that's cute, but who cares? But watching a little kid take his first steps, that's amazing, because that's terrifying, So it's about the stuff that's scary, the hard stuff, the visceral, the real juicy stuff, So it's worth it to me. Thank you so much. If you get a chance, come see the show tomorrow night. Thank you so much. Tell your stories. Tell your stories.